A simple act of kindness unlocked a secret that changed her destiny forever. It's often said that the smallest decisions can lead to the biggest turns in life. We pass hundreds of people in a day. Some faces we forget instantly, some stay with us for a moment, and a rare few change everything. For Ayesha, an ordinary college student with routine worries and modest dreams, that moment came without warning, on a day like any other. It was one of those afternoons that felt heavier than usual. The sun blazed with no mercy, and the dusty air of the narrow streets clung to every inch of exposed skin. Ayesha had just finished her final exam for the semester. Tired, hungry, and drained, her only thought was to get home, kick off her shoes, and sink into the comfort of silence. The walk home was familiar. Same turns, same shortcuts, same indifference to everything and everyone else. But that day, something stood out. At the edge of a steep alleyway, she caught sight of an elderly woman, frail and hunched over, dragging two large metal containers filled with water. The containers scraped against the uneven ground, making a jarring sound with every pull. Her frame trembled with each step, her hands barely holding on. People passed her, some too preoccupied, others too indifferent. She wasn't begging or speaking, just silently struggling. And in that silence, there was a strange heaviness, a weight beyond the physical. Ayesha slowed down. Her instincts told her to keep walking. After all, what could she really do? This wasn't her problem. But something within her wouldn't let her look away. There was no cry for help, no dramatic appeal, just the quiet suffering of someone too used to being unseen. This wasn't just about helping carry water. This was about a feeling, a pull she couldn't explain. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't charity, it was connection, a strange kind of ache, as if she'd known this woman, or someone like her, long ago. It felt deeply personal, though she couldn't place why. Most people would call it a random encounter. But in that fleeting hesitation between walking away and stepping forward, a hidden thread of fate tightened. What Ayesha didn't know was that her decision to stop wasn't just about kindness. It was about unlocking a forgotten story. A story buried in time, sealed by silence and waiting, desperately, to be noticed. And it had chosen her to bring it back to life. The moment was simple, but the ripple it would cause, profound. Some acts are so small, they barely seem to matter in the moment, yet they have the power to echo far beyond what the eye can see. For Ayesha, choosing to help that old woman was not a planned decision. It wasn't heroic, it wasn't even fully conscious. It was a quiet impulse, something that rose from a place within her she rarely listened to, and yet it changed everything. As she walked up beside the old woman, Ayesha didn't speak at first. She simply extended her hand and took hold of one of the water containers. The woman paused, startled, her eyes, cloudy with age, slowly turned to meet Ayesha's. There was no resistance, no prideful protest, just a long, tired look, as if this moment had taken years to arrive. They walked in silence. The road was short, but it felt stretched by time. Ayesha felt a strange unease, not discomfort, but something heavier, something sacred. This woman didn't seem ordinary, though there was nothing visibly unusual about her. There was something about the way her silence filled the space between them. It was the kind of silence that said more than words ever could, a lifetime of stories compressed into a single breath. When they reached her destination, a half-broken shelter at the edge of a dried-up field, the old woman let out a breath that trembled. Ayesha set down the containers, wiped her brow, and gave a polite smile, expecting a thank you or a nod. Instead, the woman lifted a frail hand and gently placed it on Ayesha's head. It wasn't a blessing in the traditional sense. It was softer, older, deeper, like a ritual that had lost its language but retained its soul. She murmured something in a voice so faint Ayesha almost missed it. Tu sirf pani nahi lai, tu rooh ko sirab kar gayi. You didn't just carry water, you quenched a thirsty soul. The words struck Ayesha like a gust of wind, cool and strange. She couldn't understand why they moved her so deeply, or why her eyes suddenly stung with tears. The woman smiled faintly, almost knowingly, and then turned away, disappearing behind a tattered curtain of cloth that served as a door. Ayesha stood there for a moment, unsure what had just happened. Her heart was beating faster than it should. It felt as though she had walked into a memory that wasn't hers. She walked home that day with more than just sweat on her skin. She carried a strange weight, light and heavy at once. A moment of kindness had turned into something else, something unsaid, something unfinished. It was supposed to be a simple act. Help, smile, move on. But kindness, when given without reason, often unlocks what logic cannot. And this act, born in silence, had just begun to unearth something long. Ayesha couldn't stop thinking about the woman. The next morning came with its usual routine: alarm, breakfast, chores, but everything felt slightly off, as though her world had shifted an inch without warning. The image of that weathered face, the trembling hand on her head, and those haunting words refused to leave her mind. She had planned to forget, to move on, but her heart wasn't cooperating. Something told her she needed to go back. As she retraced her steps through the sunlit alley, a strange anticipation began to build in her chest. Maybe she'd offer more help, bring food, or simply talk. Maybe there was more to that moment than just kindness. But when she arrived, the shack stood still, silent, closed, and empty. The woman was gone. Confused, Ayesha called out. No answer. She peeked through the loose cloth that served as the door. Inside, only a few remnants remained. Some tattered blankets, a rusted cup, and a small wooden box worn by time. Out of instinct, she stepped in and picked it up. It felt heavy, not in weight but in meaning. Inside was a folded cloth bundle. Wrapped within it, carefully preserved, was a single gold pendant. Oval in shape, delicate in design, it bore an intricate symbol, a tiny bird enclosed within a circle of vines. The moment Ayesha saw it, her heart skipped a beat. She had seen this pendant before. It was identical to one worn by her grandmother in an old black and white photo that sat on the corner of her father's study table, an image of a woman he rarely spoke about, who had apparently died long ago. Ayesha had once asked him who she was. He had only said, "She's gone, Beta. Not all stories are worth remembering." But now, the pendant, the same symbol, and with it, a crumpled, yellowed photograph. In the photo, a young girl who looked strikingly like Ayesha, not similar, uncannily alike. Her hands trembled as she held the items. None of it made sense, yet everything about it felt real, like a whisper from the past, rising after decades of silence. Who was this woman? Why did she have a picture of a girl that looked like her? And how did she possess something that belonged to her own family? The questions spiraled. What had started as a selfless moment now turned into a mystery unraveling itself thread by thread. Ayesha couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just coincidence. It felt like someone or something had meant for her to find this, as if her presence there was destined, not accidental. She walked home that day, slower than before, heart heavy with thoughts, the pendant clutched in her fist, Ayesha didn't sleep that night. The pendant, the photograph, the old woman's blessing, they swirled in her mind like pieces of a forgotten puzzle, half-formed and jagged. The resemblance in the photo was too precise to ignore, the pendant unmistakably familiar. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, personal, unsettling, and impossible to let go. By morning, her restlessness had become a quiet resolve. She needed answers, and there was only one person who might hold them: her father. She found him sitting in the veranda, reading the newspaper like he did every day. Ayesha sat down across from him, heart pounding louder than she expected. For a moment she just looked at him, not as a father, but as a man who had lived a life before her, with secrets she had never been invited into. Quietly she placed the pendant and photograph on the table. He stared at them. And then everything changed. The color drained from his face. His hands, once steady, trembled as they reached for the photo. He didn't speak. He just stared as if seeing a ghost. When he finally looked up, his eyes were not the eyes of her calm, composed father. They were the eyes of a boy, broken, grieving, remembering. "Where did you find this?" His voice cracked. Ayesha told him everything. The old woman, the water, the blessing, the box. She watched him as she spoke. Each word seemed to cut deeper into him, peeling back years of buried pain. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then, slowly, he began to speak. The woman was not just a stranger. She was his mother. Her name was Sakina. She had left the family when Ayesha's father was only a teenager, during a time of immense hardship. A long-standing conflict with his grandfather, bitter arguments, accusations of betrayal, too much damage, too little healing. She had tried to return once, years later, but the door had remained closed. Pride, grief, and wounded egos had built walls too high, and so she vanished. The family told everyone she had died. It was easier that way. Less shame, less pain. Ayesha's father had never forgiven her. Until now, he hadn't even spoken her name in decades. But she had come back, quietly, alone. And she had seen Ayesha. "She must have recognized you," he whispered, voice trembling. "You look exactly like her, when she was young." His eyes filled with tears he didn't know he still had. "She waited for someone to forgive her. And you did. Without even knowing who she was." In that moment, the weight of generations shifted. A fracture in the family's story had begun to mend, not through confrontation, but through compassion. Ayesha had unknowingly reopened a chapter that had been locked for years, and in doing so, she had become the bridge between the... Weeks later, Ayesha received a letter from a local lawyer. The old woman, Sakina, had left behind a small plot of land and a handwritten journal in Ayesha's name. The journal was filled with stories, regrets, and blessings, each page revealing a life shaped by sorrow and longing. But more than the inheritance, it was the emotional legacy that mattered, a broken history mended through compassion. Ayesha hadn't just carried water, she had carried love across generations. A single act of kindness had revived a forgotten soul, and in doing so changed the course of her own life forever.